Wonderful. Thank you, Marnie. And hello, everyone. So wonderful to be here with you. I love scrolling through these pages and seeing your names, many of your faces, and seeing in the chat how many places in the world you are all from. It has me feel really connected in a big way to see so many places. People, I saw someone saying, oh, Dubai, right at the very end, it's 11 o'clock at night. And here I am, I'm in Santa Monica at 11 o'clock in the morning. So feeling our global interconnectedness together. Um, so welcome to you. Welcome to you if you are a long-standing Sangha member of Sangha Live, and welcome to you if this is your first time here. I've taught with Sangha Live a few times, and I always really deeply enjoy it. For the global community and the depth of questions and practice that you all bring. And today I'm really going to be leaving time for that. I'll give you just a brief introduction now, and we'll do some sitting practice together. I'm going to talk about what Marnie mentioned, which is how do we work with all parts of ourselves inside of practice? How do we welcome all of us into practice, all parts of ourselves and all parts of life? And then I'll leave a lot of time for dialogue. So you can even think now like, oh, if you have questions brewing, there'll be time and we'll bring those into dialogue together. But maybe I just want to mention, as Marnie said, that I am an insight meditation teacher. I've been practicing for about 26 years, was really the beginnings of my practice, my formal practice. And over those years, I've looked about how to include more and more of life and more of myself in my practice. Ultimately, to exclude nothing has been my aim. It's felt like for me that that's where the deepest liberation is possible. And so I'll be bringing my personal experience and insight and questions. I see myself as a lifelong learner, so I hope to be in the questions with all of you. I should mention that I'm based in Santa Monica, California, which is the traditional unceded lands of the Tongva people. It's a beautiful day here today. Very, very grateful for the sunshine and blue skies. And I'm originally from Vancouver, Canada, but I've lived in the US for about 20 years. It brought my Dharma practice brought me here. And so I'm a person that has lived in different realms, not just in those two places, but others as well. And so I welcome you wherever you are in the world and whatever you're bringing today. So how about we start by dropping into our practice and relating to our direct experience. You know, I often say Dharma practice, it can be theoretical. I often laugh when I talk to students who say like, oh, and then I read another book this week and I found this most recent book. And there's so many fascinating things out there to learn, but ultimately, it's about how we take all of that learning into our direct experience. So we'll start there today. We'll start with our direct experience. And we'll do that through sitting in meditation, probably for about 20-25 minutes. So I invite you to take some moments to get comfortable. And whatever that means for you, you know, I'm going to be talking today that this practice is not about being at war with ourselves. It's not about being restrictive in a way that causes harm. So take a moment and find a way for you to be comfortable. Make sure that your body feels at ease. When we have ease, it's much easier to open. So if you need to put anything down, put anything aside to feel like you can be present here, you can do that now. And if you've been rushing to get here today, I really invite you to just notice, I'm here. I'm here in this moment on this Sunday morning or Sunday evening. wherever you're at, Sunday afternoon. I'm sitting in this room in this time and place. This is where I'm at right now. And really taking that in. And as you take that in, take a few full and deep breaths. Fully inhaling and filling your body with the in-breath. And then completely exhaling, fully releasing the out-breath. Doing that a couple more times. And with the out-breath landing here in this moment more and more. Breathing in and feeling the sensations of your body as it fills with air. And exhaling and feeling yourself rooted in the chair, on the cushion. Noticing that gravity's got you. Even if you wanted to float away, you likely couldn't. You're actually held here. As you find yourself landing in this moment, drawing the threads of attention that might be hooked out onto different things of life and drawing them into this time and space. And choosing one anchor that's helpful to root your attention in. That could be continuing the breath as we've just been doing, letting it be natural, but following the in breath and the out breath. It might be sounds that are most helpful to you, so allowing the arising and passing of sounds. Or you might choose one place in your body, an anchor, and root your attention there. Pick just one anchor and let that be your landing place. A place for your attention to rest and gather. So staying with that anchor. But if other experiences arise, if you find different aspects of life entering your meditation, different emotions, sensations, experience, open to them. You can ask yourself, what's happening right now? And receive what is ever is there. You might find a strong sensation rising and expressing, or an emotion that wants to be felt. See if you can receive it with approval, with welcoming. Oh, this is what pressure in my chest feels like. or this is what restlessness feels like. Can I welcome in whatever arises? Practicing that welcoming. And you might find that just the act of welcoming alone has the experience, the sensation, the emotion shift and change. And if it completely fades away, you can return to your anchor. If it's still there or grows stronger, you can be curious about it. Oh, what's happening here? What is this experience of sleepiness? How is it arising and expressing itself through me? Or what is this experience of sadness or agitation or joy? Aiming to welcome it with approval and then be with it with a curiosity. Welcoming whatever arises and meeting it with that open curiosity. How is life expressing itself through me right now? You may notice the sensation, the nuance, the texture of whatever's present. And if it fades or disappears, then just return back to that original anchor. if you find yourself really wrestling with your experience or in conflict with it, just notice, how am I relating to my experience? How am I relating to what is? And inviting an approval of even that. Oh, this is what it feels like to be in conflict with what's arising, or this is what it feels like to be lost inside of something. You can include that in your practice too. And I welcome evenness. Can I be curious about evenness? And noticing how you're relating towards your experience, whatever it is. How am I relating to what's arising right here and now? Renewing your intention to welcome, to be curious, to bring your loving awareness to whatever's arising. What's happening right now? How is life expressing through me right now? And if there's something that you wish wasn't there, wasn't happening, maybe you can get especially curious about that. And as we move towards the end of this meditation, receiving however it's been. Notice how you feel towards your experience and receive that too. Oh, this is what is. This is the experience of the moment. Can I receive it? Thank you, everyone, for your practice. I want to see as many of you as I can. And I invite you, as you land back here, if you want to turn your cameras on, I do love seeing your faces. And I also understand it's not always possible, but it's wonderful to relate person to person. So I'm first of all curious about what parts came up in that meditation that you wished were not there, that maybe you most disliked. Were there experiences? Were there emotions, sensations, things outside or inside? And if you feel like you would like to, you could share them in the chat. I kept thinking about my bills. Yeah, not an unusual one. Challenging to stay with nausea and vomiting. Yes, really strong body sensations. The need for achievement. God, that one can really get us in our spiritual practice too, right? Even in meditation, we can see how these things get in there. Sadness and grief, worrying, the list of things. There's a lot of things, anxiety, the current world news, neighbors arguing. I live in an urban area. I can hear all kinds of things always happening outside my street. And so, yeah, it's really interesting to notice, right? It's like we're sitting here, we're in this presence, this practice of awareness, and there's sometimes pleasant things, there's sometimes neutral things, and there's sometimes unpleasant things. And usually the unpleasant things are really hard to be with. Though, honestly, for some of us, even the pleasant things can be hard to be with. A lot of joy or love or pleasure in the body can surprisingly equally be difficult. But it's really helpful to notice, like, oh, there's parts that arise inside of me. There's experiences that arise inside of me that I'm in aversion to. Our meditation practice, what we're aiming towards is cultivating a kind of non-aversion to life, to experience, and instead a real radical welcoming of whatever arises. Not because it's always pleasant, and not because even sometimes those things that arise in us aren't always skillful, but we want to welcome them so we can see them for what they are. So we can start to understand the true nature of our minds and our hearts, and we can learn to work with them. It's really hard to get to know something when we're in disapproval of it. I often say that, and maybe you've experienced that. If someone's trying to change you or help you, but meanwhile they're being really disapproving of you, it can be really, really hard to work with that. And so what we practice here is, how do we sit? How do we approve? How do we welcome in? But of course, we get caught, and we, it is my ongoing practice. Like, oh, if I could just get rid of this headache. Right now I have a little cold, right? And it's like, if I could just get rid of this headache, then I would feel better. Or, currently right now my dad's in the hospital. I've been on the phone a lot, and it's like, oh, if I had just heard just before I got on this call that he was getting released today, then I would be able to be here in a better way. There's always a lot of things that, and it feels like there's always something. There's always something that feels like if I could get rid of that, then everything would be okay, or at least things would be better. If I didn't have the sleepiness or agitation or this longing, or if it wasn't so cold or anything. Peter Levine, who I study with, he's the founder of somatic experiencing. He talks about we have our zone of tolerance, what we can really stay present with, what we can stay conscious with. And things arise outside of that. And when they do, when we have experiences that are outside what we feel we can tolerate, we go into fight or flight. We want to check out, we want to get rid of it, or maybe even we just want to indulge in it, we get lost in it. But what we do is we turn into reaction to life. Actually, I really love the story from the Buddha. He talks about the second arrow. Like, for instance, my headache. I'm sitting here and I have a headache. And then it's like, oh, then I start wrestling with the headache. Can I get rid of this headache? Is there something I could do to release this headache? Geez, I wish this headache wasn't here. So there's the initial arrow of like, oh, there's a pain. There's a pain of something. My dad's in the hospital. That's painful. But then there's all of the agitation and the wrestling and the disapproval I get into. And that's arrow after arrow of my own reactivity, really. And then, of course, we could have another arrow of the reactivity to our reactivity. And so we just go on and on like this, in this internal battle. And I really love Pema Chodron, so often she says it so well in these arenas. She says, when something hurts in life, we don't usually think of it as our path or as a source of wisdom. In fact, we think that the reason we're on the path is to get rid of this painful feeling. I mean, how many people here started a path because they wanted to get rid of a painful feeling? Certainly me. But in this way, we naively cultivate a subtle aggression towards ourselves. And this is really what I want to talk about today, is how we can turn our practice into a war against ourselves, and how instead of fighting, annihilating, or getting lost and indulging, how instead we can actually heal and liberate and transform these challenging experiences that we have. Because we know that there is enough violence in the world. There is enough violence that we don't need to add to it inside or outside of ourselves. So this is my invitation today, is to look at how do we actually truly create the conditions for inner peace, and not through a Pollyanna type, oh, it's all okay, whatever's arising, it's just fine. But actually, how do we really skillfully work with these difficult things? I need to have a sip of my tea. So I will say, I have been on quite a journey to really explore this kind of non-violent inclusiveness of experience. I think probably from a very young age, I was a perfectionist. From as young as I can remember, it's really looking at like, how can I get things just right? Like, how can I have things feel just right? And maybe some of you relate, and maybe, again, I often find people on the spiritual path have some of this. There's also in insight meditation, the Theravadan path is sometimes called the path of purification. And I laugh at that now, because I think, yeah, when I started, I really loved that idea of purification, like get rid of all the bad stuff. That sounds right up my alley. Let me just be really pure. And I could see it, in folks around me that were also drawn in that way. Friends that went off to study in Burma, but would come back with chronic fatigue because they'd be striving so hard, they'd be trying so hard, they'd be so at war with themselves. And certainly I sit every day with clients that are in these internal battles inside of themselves, like so many of us are. And so, again, this practice can become kind of like a ground of war rather than a ground of healing. I want to acknowledge that people are really sharing some profound things in the chat, and I'm noticing them there. And I'm going to come back to some of them. It's hard for me to follow both, but I do want to encourage you to share, and because likely you will notice things that arise as we're talking about this. So please feel free to share in the chat, and I just apologize if I'm not able to acknowledge all of them as we go, but I definitely will leave lots of time for our interaction. So I have to say that, early in my practice, about 21 years ago, I moved to the US to study Buddhist meditation. And I started on a path of a 5-year teacher training and a lot of long retreats, 3-month retreats, 2-month retreats, and such. And as I was doing that practice, I really started to think like, wow, in the silence and the solitude and the seclusion, I could feel such beauty. I could tap into such spaciousness, like such deep mystery, that I began to think, maybe everything else in life isn't so worth it. Actually, isn't as interesting as this. And I reached a turning point in my practice where I was trying to decide between, do I want to go off and take the monastic route of renunciation? Or do I actually want to go, and if I'm going to engage with life, to deeply engage with life? And I realized for myself, though I could see a lot of benefit in monastic practice, that for me, there would be a freedom in really learning to turn towards the things that I usually excluded. And for me, those were things around intimacy and connection, things that really terrified me around sexuality and desire, that felt like in some ways renouncing them would be so much easier. It would feel like there'd be a simplicity, there would be a purity. But personally for myself, I knew that like, oh, in some ways I wouldn't really be free. I would have a conditional freedom. But I wanted to go beyond conditional freedom. I wanted to go beyond even my conditioned assumptions about those areas, all of the painful feelings and reactions I had to them. And instead to actually look at like, what happens if in those arenas of life, like desire, like sex, like intimacy, I could actually learn to welcome them in, just like we did in our meditation, to really be curious and to really look deeply so that I could understand them and be free inside of them. And that really became my path. I decided to not become a monastic. Instead, I began a really deep study of the erotic and intimacy, and really deeply exploring like, okay, how can I understand these things that I've never really understood? How can I welcome in these things that before I would just judge and exclude? And there was a lot of freedom there. But interestingly, over that time, what I found is even in trying to come into relation externally with things that I had previously cut off, that internally I was still using the same kind of forcefulness, shaming, perfectionism in those arenas that I had used in my sitting meditation practice, in my retreat practice, and in other ways. And it was like, oh wow, it's like I'm learning to include and be curious and to welcome these external arenas of life. But internally, somehow, when I'm faced with deep fears, deep spots of shame, really difficult parts of myself and difficult feelings, that I would still have this kind of forcefulness with myself. And I got really curious of what would it look like what would be the least violent, what would be a non-violent, non-forceful, non-shaming, even non-pathologizing approach to working with my inner world. In the same way, I was trying to undo the shame and the pathology and all of the judgments and conditioned ideas about like sex and intimacy, desire. It was like, what if I actually turned that inwardly and looked at like, what would it look like there to not make so many parts of myself wrong? And that's been my practice, interiorly, professionally, in these years. And I know on Sangha Live I've shared this poem before, but it's one I come back to over and over again, by the 10th century Japanese poetess Izumi Shikibu, because she just gives this little glimpse of what this is like. She says, watching the moon at dawn, solitary mid-sky, I knew myself completely, no part left out. I knew myself completely, no part left out. And that's really been a guiding compass for me of how not to leave any part of my life out externally, but also how to not leave any part of myself out internally. Of course, just like some parts externally are really hard to stay conscious with. I mean, there is reasons that we reject, we renounce, why there's a lot of religious and other kind of prohibitions around things like sexuality, around things like self-expression, around things like the force of aggression, because they're really, really hard to stay conscious with. And you might think for yourself right now, like, oh, what in my life are the areas that I find hardest to stay conscious with? I find hardest to stay awake with. Like I either get completely reactive, or I completely check out, or I just run away. And also equally internally, what are the areas that most get me? You know, what are the things where it's like, wow, I find it really hard to sit with myself? And they might be very obvious, like very overt, strong things like, wow, I have a lot of rage to work with, or I have a very obsessive mind. But they might be more subtle, like, oh, I find myself like there's a kind of a flavor of loneliness. And when I feel that flavor of loneliness, this can be mine. I feel that flavor of loneliness. I notice just well, sometimes I don't even notice it till later. I'm suddenly on my phone scrolling on Instagram. And it's like, oh, it's this very subtle thing that's hard to stay present with. Maybe for you, there's like a very subtle melancholy, or a very sudden, a subtle feeling of like, I'm just not right in the world. And then you do something to turn away from it. I mean, for so many of us, right, we have now these sort of subtle addictions, like, well, not always so subtle, like being on our phone and things like that. And so we can look at like, wow, big things that are hard to stay conscious with, but also little things. And then we find ourselves consumed by them and we don't even know why. Like, why is it midnight and I'm just here scrolling up my phone? What's happening to me? Or why am I suddenly caught in this same argument over and over again? I don't understand why I find myself here. And so, you know, we see this happening, right? And then we might react like, I just need to get rid of this. I need to get rid of this habit. I need to get rid of this anger. I need to throw my phone out. I need to stop getting in relationships. Sometimes some renunciation is skillful, but often what happens is we go to cut these things out and then we never learn how to be skillful with them. We just try to annex our anger or you know, whatever it is. Like we try to get rid of it. And it's like, and then we lose touch with actually an understanding. And so we miss out on maybe the more nuances of working with things. I was actually listening to a talk, a Jungian talk last night, and they said this brilliant thing. The face we turn towards our unconscious is the face it turns towards us. That's actually a quote from Jung himself. The face we turn towards the unconscious is the face it turns towards us. So we can think of these things in us that we might reject or dislike. And, you know, even when I was saying in the meditation, notice how you're relating to your experience. Do you relate to it with a repulsion? Do you relate to it with a judgment? Do you relate to it with a dismissal? Likely, you're going to be feeling more of that. You know, it's like, oh, our unconscious looks back on us with judgment, with dismissal. So again, we're just getting curious here of like, how do we relate to these things? I have to admit, when I was thinking about how often in spiritual practice we talk about these things, I don't know if it's so much like this, but certainly in my early practice, there was a lot of language like, these difficult parts of us are our enemy. They're defilements. Maybe the nicer word, considered nicer, was poisons. They're darkness. In 12th step, you know, we talk about character defects, or you might think of like shadow or ego. Like if we don't like them, if they cause difficulty in our life, we label them with these really strong words. You know, if you even take the way that we've started to think of ego in spiritual practice, like if anything inside of us is unlikable, it's like, just call it ego and then just try to get rid of it. You know, I was reading about ego recently and seeing things like, oh, your ego is your greatest enemy, or your ego will destroy you. We have so much dogma about these parts of ourselves, like religious, spiritual, and otherwise. And you know, it's helpful to understand that even a lot of spiritual and religious traditions were developed inside of militaristic cultures. And we might not even realize that. And so there's a lot of language of things like controlling, combating, conquering, eliminating. I have to say, actually, I was reading Shanti Deva, right? One of the most famous Tibetan teachers. And the translation of one of the texts says, he was talking about working with what's called defilements, difficult parts of ourselves. And the text says, this shall be my all-consuming passion. Filled with rancor, I will wage my war. Better if I perish in the fire, better that my head be severed than from my body than ever I should serve or revere my mortal enemy, the defiled emotions. Wow. That is something, huh? Like that is quite a statement. And of course, in a time and a place, that language can speak to people. And ultimately it's aiming to rouse a certain spiritual dedication and a certain kind of energy to face difficult things. But for most of us, we already have enough of that, of that enemy within type language. And certainly in the West, without a fundamental ground of self-love, especially if you have distorted religious conditioning, we just get caught in a further violent self-improvement project. So I really want to invite you to look at what's the language you're using? What are the kind of concepts or feelings you use to relate to the difficult parts of yourself or the difficult parts of life? Like, do you see them as enemies? Do you experience your spiritual practice as a battle zone? You know, are you here to eradicate, annihilate, conquer? You know, how is it that you're relating? And again, just getting curious. And I noticed someone asked, what are some kinder labels? I'm definitely going to talk about that. So you know, an example I often think of is having a puppy, right? Like, which is kind of like our minds. You have this puppy, it's new, it's full of life energy, it's peeing everywhere, it's tearing up the sofa in your shoes, it's doing all of these things. And if we look at like, oh, there's a pathology, there's something wrong with this puppy, like this puppy's causing problems. So then we put the puppy in a cage, right? And we say, we've got to contain this puppy. This puppy's bad. And then the puppy's in the cage, but then the puppy starts barking. And it's barking and barking and barking. Of course, it doesn't like being in a cage. So then we put the puppy in the basement. And then the puppy's in the basement and it's tearing up the basement and it's getting louder and louder. We go to look at the puppy starts biting us. So we keep the door closed, right? You can imagine just like on and on and on. Like Jung said, that which is not integrated is exaggerated. So how often do we treat these difficult parts of us kind of like that puppy? Like, oh, let me get rid of it. Let me tuck it away. Let me not feel it. And instead, it's just in there deeper, in many ways, causing more difficulty in our lives. And not only that, but we're probably cut off from the life energy and the vitality that that puppy would have if it was more in its natural habitat rather than caged off or shoved away somewhere. So this doesn't mean that we just get a cat. I do have a cat. She's probably going to make an appearance at some time. That's hilarious. Even my cat causes trouble. She thinks she's the boss of me for sure. But yes, so it's really, it's not about like, okay, let this puppy pee all over your house, right? Or let these things run wild. It's not a spiritual bypassing in that way. But it's really, how do we work with discernment? How do we work with wisdom? How do we work with compassion? And in that way, rather than eradicate or annihilate, I would think of, how do we transform? How do we metamorphize? How do we liberate these difficult things inside of us? And the first step that we really want to take is approval. That's why I kept bringing that up in the meditation over and over again. How can we say, this is what's here? Oh, here I have this little puppy full of life that's peeing all over my house. This is what is. Can I start with saying, this is what is? Now, this doesn't mean that we're going to just be like, oh, I just want this to go on forever, or that, that you don't see when something might be causing harm. But we start by saying like, okay, can I welcome this in? This is, sometimes what we could call a sati, mindfulness. Is this mindfulness is without judgment, we're noticing what is there. Like sadness is here. Obsession is here. Hatred is here. Oh, this thing is here. And can I start with that? And can I start by saying like, and it's okay in this moment that it's here. It's okay in this moment that it's here. Even I think of often one of the most, what do you call it? Kind of experiences that we can be biased against, that gets rejected in spiritual practice, is the energy of aggression. But gosh, like what a helpful energy that can be. So rather than it's like, wow, we feel this upwelling of aggression, like, oh my gosh, something's wrong with me, let me tamp it down. Can we get curious? Can we open? Can we approve? Oh, this is what's here. And talking about curiosity, yeah. So once we approve of it, like once we welcome it in, once we say, this is, okay, here's this puppy, I've welcomed it into my house. How can I get curious about what's happening? The Buddha actually talked about that just sati alone, just mindfulness alone, just that kind of welcoming, noticing alone is actually not enough, but that it needs to be paired with sampajanya, which means clearly comprehending or deeply seeing. And it's that not only recognizing like, oh, what I'm doing is holding a cup of tea and it's warm in my hand and it's weighty, like that kind of like, this is mindfulness, right? Like I'm aware of this, but it's clearly comprehending, like, why did I pick up this tea? Like, what is this? It's actually having a wisdom element to it, a discernment. And it's not saying like, dislike, wish I could get rid of, but it's kind of like a judicious evaluation, like, oh yeah, this cup of tea is warm. I know it's going to soothe my throat. I'm going to have a sip right now. But what we want to notice is that sampajanya, this kind of deep seeing, is not to leap to right, wrong, good, bad. It's to actually start noticing. So like, let's say we take our puppy. We have this puppy. It's running all over the house. And, it's like, okay, we're with it. We're not yelling at it. We're not thinking it's bad. We're not pathologizing it. But then we see, oh, this puppy doesn't know where to go to the bathroom. So we need to gently train this puppy. This is where you have to go. Here's the newspaper. Come over here. And sometimes meditation teachers talk about this with our own mind. You do that over and over. Right back here. Come back to the breath. Oh, you ran away again. Come back. In this very loving way, over and over again, so the puppy knows where to go. So this would be this quality of wise discernment. And the way that we can work with that, we can apply this kind of wisdom, this sort of deep seeing to difficult things inside of us, is that when they rise up, is to first of all welcome them. Like I was saying in the beginning, if we are not welcome, if we're not welcomed by others, if we're not approved by others, it's really hard to reveal who we are. It's really hard to get very vulnerable if someone's sitting there judging you and thinking you're a terrible person and all of these kinds of things. But if someone comes with like a deep, genuine curiosity, like, I truly want to know who you are, I truly want to understand your experience. Like, if we can approach conflict between people in that way with a deep desire to understand, there's a much better chance of there being connection. There's a much better chance of being understanding. So you can apply that to yourself. Can I truly get curious about this rage inside of me? Can I truly be curious about this pain inside of me, or this obsessiveness inside of me, rather than just wishing it wasn't there or trying to get rid of it? So that might start with, first of all, noticing how you're relating to it. You're this clear comprehending could be noticing, how am I relating to this experience? Oh, I'm really pushing it away, or I'm really clinging on to it. Okay, so that's how I'm relating to it. Can that part just relax a little bit? Can that pushing away relax a little bit? Okay, if it can, then I can get curious. What's happening here? What is this rage? What's the quality of it? Maybe there's something it wants me to know. Often with rage or aggression or these energies, there's an energy that's never been able to release. Maybe there's an energy that needs to move. Maybe there's a life force that needs to express. Or maybe there's a sadness, a deep grief that needs to be felt that we've held at bay. But it's when we can be curious and approving that this thing can reveal itself. Most of our, what you would call, what's been called defilements, painful habits, things like this, 100% I can say, through time after time of working with students and working with individuals, that our painful habits are intelligent responses that we at some point developed in the face of an intolerable situation. Like something when we were young, at some point in life, we had a very difficult situation, at least to us, it felt that way at that time. And this was an intelligent response. We call these sankharas. It's like a knot is formed. We develop a response that was really intelligent at that time, the best we could come up with, but then it keeps going. And maybe it's no longer intelligent, but it's still there. And only when we get to really be curious about it and see it, can we liberate it. And truly, like, I've never seen like arrogant, deluded, cruel part of myself or another that wasn't actually this, that wasn't actually a very young and scared child. And when we bring this quality of curiosity, we get to see that. It's really kind of analogous to working with nightmares. Maybe if you've had nightmares, you've probably looked at like, how do I get rid of nightmares? And you might think like, oh, don't eat before bed, or don't do this or that. But really, one of the deepest ways to work with nightmares is that you turn towards them. There's somebody chasing you in a nightmare, either in the nightmare or when you wake up. You can do it through your imagination. Turn towards them. What do they want? What does that person that's chasing you with a knife want from you? We always think, oh, I've just got to run, I've got to get away. But actually, the alchemy is in turning towards. So that's the invitation in working with these experiences, is how do we turn towards them? How do we get curious about them? When we're sitting in meditation, like we did at the beginning, you can identify a difficult or challenging experience that's arising. You can notice how you're relating to it. Like, oh, I'm relating to this with a lot of aversion. You can see if that aversion is willing to soften so that you can welcome in and be curious and see what this feeling inside of you wants to express. Can I be present with it? Can I be with it so maybe even it naturally resolves, which often it does when we're willing to receive it, when we're willing to be curious, it naturally resolves. And if it doesn't, maybe it needs some deeper listening. There's more that it needs to feel and express. And you have that capacity. That's your loving awareness, is your capacity to do that, to be there, to be present with it as whatever is in you can express itself. You can be with it. Maya Angelou, her beautiful saying, love liberates. Love liberates. It's not about annihilating, getting rid of. It liberates. Like I said before, it could also be say love alchemizes, love metamorphizes through this ability to be with. So the next time you're sitting, or the next time in life, and like fear or judgment, aversion, rejection, whatever it is arises, can you turn your loving awareness on that too? Can you welcome that in? Can you get curious about what it needs to express? Pema Chodron says, only when we know our own darkness can we be present with the darkness of others. Only when we know our own darkness can we be present with the darkness of others. And that's this practice, being present with our own darkness. Compassion becomes real when we recognize our shared humanity. So this is the kind of practice I want to invite you to explore. If there's a part that you're wanting to get rid of, that you're ashamed of, that you feel does not belong here, shouldn't be a part of your spiritual practice, what happens if you welcome it in? What happens if you're curious about it? What happens if you're open for it to express whatever it wants to express through you, and that you can meet it with that loving awareness? Just really, I'm going to finish with this and open to questions. A few years back, there was this video that went around on social media of a little child having a tantrum, having big feelings, really. And this little child was sitting, and the child's father was sitting with it. And the father was just there holding space for the child, was not trying to hold the child down, was not trying to change the child, was not even actually really trying to comfort the child or in any way make the child stop. The father was simply with the child. And as he was with the child got to express what it needed to express, and then naturally calm down and return to its naturally calm, energized, whatever, creative kind of natural state. And I thought, wow, that's such a beautiful example that, we might have old school parenting that would say, you need to discipline that child, you need to contain that child, you need to stop the child from doing that. And then we have a deeper understanding that's emerged that, I actually think is a very ancient understanding, that if we bring this compassionate, discerning presence, that we can help liberate ourselves. We can help transform these challenging aspects of ourselves in our practice without violence, but with this loving awareness, this curiosity, this approval. So I know there's been some different things in the chat, and I want to open. We have about 15 minutes to talk about this and how it might show up in your practice, both in your practice internally, but maybe it's also in your practice of different aspects of life that you find challenging to include. And so I would love to open it up. And you could either put questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand under the reaction. There's a raised hand button. And if you want to come on and speak with me and ask your question directly, I'd love to hear it. So this is a moment we can take a moment and see what's arising inside of you. How do you feel towards this exploration of a nonviolent liberation? What comes up inside of you? And all questions are welcome. All feelings are welcome. Anna. Hi, Anna. I think Marnie will. There you go. Hi.
Hello. Can you hear me well?
I can. It's nice to hear and see you.
Well, thank you very much for this session. It was so insightful and absolutely beautiful. It answered so many of my questions. My questions I had inside of me for weeks, months, I don't know. But anyway, so thank you very much for that. And what I actually wanted to ask you is that there is something really challenging that I'm noticing, and it's really difficult because I've been going through this kind of healing process, like accelerated healing process, for the last year and a bit. And sometimes I feel really, really excited because I'm feeling, oh my goodness, like I'm doing really, really well, and I'm really compassionate with my feelings. I notice progress. And then it kind of, something creeps in. I don't even notice it. And before I know it, I'm like just kind of, like this kind of confusion. Like, I thought I'm doing really, really well, and it kind of feels I'm back at the beginning, and it's kind of a little bit frustrating. And then I come out of it and I'm thinking, okay, I'm on it again, and I'm doing really, really well. And it's kind of repeating, I mean, every time I learn something new, and every time I do progress in certain areas, but then it's kind of, so I don't know, do you have any kind of insight how to actually deal with those dips and how not to be too hard on oneself when this kind of disappointment kind of comes, like, why am I not progressing as much as I probably feel I'm progressing? Thank you very much.
Yes, it's such a great question. And there's a few different things I want to say about it. One of them is that there is a natural flow to life, like of opening, closing, of things coming up and things coming down, like tides going out and tides going in. It's just a natural law, really, that, I mean, we can see the problem when we try to progress, like up, 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 and never come down. Just look at the, kind of what we do to our planet when we do that. And so, but yet somehow we think in our spiritual life, it should just be this linear, continuous upward progression with never a dip. And there's a natural flow again, where the way I experience it and I see with my students is that often we have, like, maybe you could say we go up, right? And we have an opening, we have a realization, we have an experience. And then we need to integrate that. And we need to often, in some ways, come down a little to integrate it. We maybe need, like, we go out into the light, we have a realization, we need to come back in the dark, and there's a digestion that happens. But we fear the dark, and we fear the down, and because we think there's something wrong with it, right? And so to notice, yes, the ebbs and flows of life, Jane, as you say, like, to notice, first of all, our relationship to the down, like, oh, how do I feel towards this down? Oh, I think something's wrong with me. I think there's something wrong with it. And you might get curious about it. Like when you said, I feel this thing come in. And it's like, oh, I feel something come in. what is that thing? Can I turn towards it? Like I almost imagine sort of like a little, like a flavor or a shadow. Can I get curious? Like, oh, okay, you're here. There's this thing coming in. What does it feel like? Like, what is it wanting of me? And just to get curious, because we actually, the truth is we don't know, but you could find out. So get in relationship with that feeling that comes in. And even it might be a month later that you suddenly realize it's there,
Yeah.
or you might realize it the day it's arriving. But whenever you do, could you imagine turning towards it and getting curious?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that helpful?
That's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Good.
Thank you so
Okay.
much for
Thank
your
you.
advice. It makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate your time.
Thanks, Anna. It really, it's so interesting to see in our practice. And I really worked with this. I mean, I have to say it's an analogy for all of life, that when we feel like something is wrong, if we're not always progressing, and you know, because I teach sexuality, I say this is one of the biggest mistakes people make in sexuality, is that they feel like they should just try to go, 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 go until they get some big reaction, versus a natural eroticism has waves, it has ups and downs, and it's about following a wave rather than just always aiming for a climax. But in our practice, we think we should only ever be aiming for that climax. We should only ever be aiming for the up. And so again, then we pathologize, we turn against more of those down times. They also have their purpose, and we can get curious about why they're there. Gabby, hi. I think Marlene's gonna unmute you. Marnie's gonna unmute you.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello here. Thank you for the practice today. I think for me, what has come up more so lately, like exhaustion. I think, like, especially first world countries work really hard. They they really don't know how to rest. Like, I come from other cultures, and they take rest seriously, and Sundays everything is off. Especially Sundays, not working, nobody works, all the shops are closed, but it's changing. Like, I notice every time I go home, it's changing. It's now they're open on Sundays, and so, but I noticed in my body, like, with work and everything, yeah, I'm grateful I have a job. I like, strive to get my degrees, but now I feel like it's more work. Like, it's like, and I thought, like, it would be the other way around, like a little bit less work, but I'm working more hours, I'm getting paid like salary, and I'm just like working to a point of exhaustion where I'm like, is this really worth it? Like, should I just go down to, like, clock in, clock out type kind of work? But I'm feeling it, and I take my vacations, I do take them, and then I come back from vacations and I'm still like, am I in the right place? Like, honestly, like, I just, I'd rather be like somewhere in Tibet, somewhere else, and be like just exploring another culture where, this is not like my body, my mind. And I check with myself every day, like, how's my body, how's my mind, how emotions, how's my spiritual being, and I've been noticing, like I'm being, and two people left in the organization, so then now I'm being like,
Yeah.
to the point of more exhaustion, and now being like like, you grab something, you squeeze all the water out of it, like, just getting squeezed. And I was just like, oh, this is like insane. This is not what I what I expected out of my degree. And I know, like, service industries are very, very hard, they're very demanding. Like, I know my doctor, even, like, he works his butt off, and I know he works really hard, and I see it in other professions, but I'm like, is this the way it's gonna go? Because
This is such a good inquiry, Gabby. I'm really glad you brought this up. because it sounds like, first of all, a really significant question that's coming up for you to look at in life, right? Is like, I had this one expectation. This is not what it is. And what do I most want in my life? And one thing I really want to emphasize is that, like, yes, we can work on liberation. We can open to liberation no matter the circumstances of life. That is true. I mean, we hear the Dalai Lama talk about people in prison, Nelson Mandela, all of this. And the purpose of practice is not just to make ourselves more comfortable in hell. Like, it's not just to, like, oh, accept this so that you can keep going, or that you can just continue to be part of this machine that doesn't work for you. It sounds like, and especially when fatigue comes up, there's a part of you that's really looking for some attention and maybe has something important to say. And whether or not you can actually follow through on what it asks of you, but it sounds like there's some big things inside of you that are asking for attention. And what it would be like if you really listen to them, like if you really listen to the fatigue and what it's asking and what it's needing, if you actually attended to those parts, and then you can see, like, then you can see on the other side, okay, what's the right choice for me? Maybe you might not know yet, but to start by actually listening. When I really see with people, like, when our bodies start speaking loudly, when we start to have physical symptoms of things, most often it's something that really needs tending to. And so I'd invite you to make that part of your practice, is to turn towards it and look and see. And maybe there's just small adjustments, but maybe there's some big adjustments. And maybe that becomes part of your practice, is to do that with some courage.
Yeah. I mean, even after this, I have to do some work just to catch up. It's just,
Yeah.
I'm like, I'd rather be outside, but I do take breaks, 2 hours, going out in nature, and that helps. And that I try to do a lot of self-care, but I do notice the tightness in my muscles, like my muscles get tight.
Turn towards that. And that is where even, I mean, self-care is so wonderful, but also sometimes self-care prevents us from actually having to face the harder questions of maybe how I've set my life up isn't quite working for me. And so keep up with the self-care, but also really turn towards these deeper questions. I really encourage it, because it sounds like there's something there that really needs some attention.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Beth.
Hi, can you hear me now?
I can.
Hi.
And I should just mention, I just noticed the time. I think we have just about 1 minute, but let's do it.
I'll make this real quick. So resonate with this whole proposal, this whole way of approaching, that part of us that we're just really stiff arming. How do you stay, like the Buddha says, hatred does not overcome hatred, only love does. How do you stay, or how do you soften towards that part? Like, can we get like a little, maybe mini something, probably maybe not just a deep breath, but there might be something like to touch into that would give me a little bit of impetus to just soften towards that part I've been so reluctant to see. Thanks.
That's a great question. Thank you. There's a lot I could say here. Just to start with, like, physically, if there is any way to relax the body, that definitely can help. We're all so connected. So, like, oh, is there any softness available inside of me? But also, what I just say is, again, come back to noticing, how am I relating towards this part? Wow, I feel really tense towards this part. I feel really agitated towards this part. Then I can turn towards that tenseness and agitation. oh, what's this tenseness and agitation? Can I receive that with a welcoming? Can I be curious about that? So sometimes we want to get rid of like our disapproval. We want to get rid of, you know, our tightness. And it's like, but maybe that tightness and disapproval first needs the love. And if we turn towards that first, then naturally the softening can happen. We don't have to skip over it or try to get it to go away. Maybe if it's actually there, if it's not releasing, that's the thing that needs our loving awareness. So there's more I could say, but I think I have to leave it there. I do want to say that I've really appreciated being here, and thank you so much everyone for your feedback. I really love reading it. And I want to offer that if you would like to continue and learn more, I do one-on-one and couples work. You can learn more about it. I'll put it in the chat here. I think also probably there'll be, there might be an email afterwards, I'm not sure, where you can do this kind of work with me, of being in this kind of dialogue with the different parts of yourself and life. I also offer women's groups where we do this in groups. If you identify as a woman, it's a really powerful way to do it in community. And I have one coming up that is European timing friendly. So I'll put a link for that as well. You can also follow my teachings on Instagram. You can find me there. I'll just put it here. It's Justine A. Dawson. And I do ongoing short little Dharma little clips. You can find that. Regardless whether I see you there or I'll see you here at Sangha Live next time I'm here, I really wish you all good things in your practice. I do want to remind you that if you have appreciated this class, please support it. Your Dana really enables me to keep teaching and Sangha Live to keep offering this really amazing resource every Sunday. And you can use, I think there's a button that pops up below your video here where you can make a donation. And again, like Marnie says, if you make it before midnight, then Sangha Live shares that with me so I can, you could support my teaching and continuing of offering this nonviolent path to liberation. And then great, Marnie also posted there the Sangha Live update, all of the upcoming courses and talks and things like that. So lots of opportunities to practice. Be kind to yourself. And even when you're not kind, can you welcome that not kindness? The beautiful thing about mindfulness is that we can turn loving awareness on anything. And look, and there's my cat. She did make her appearance. So yes, big blessings to you all. I'm sending much love, much welcoming, much loving kindness to all parts of you. So thank you so much. And you are welcome to unmute yourself and to come on and together to say goodbye.